Karen Bayne is the next speaker. She's coming from New Zealand. Then
Yes.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. My name's Karen. I come from Scion, which is the New Zealand Forest Research Institute. So, as you said, I'm talking about fire in New Zealand. And New Zealand has widespread use of prescribed burn-offs and a tradition of using fire to manage the land, but there is some contention around the use of fire in the landscape. I'll be presenting just a snapshot of results of a recent study into prescribed burning in New Zealand, focusing on why people are using fire and what's driving their attitudes towards the use of fire. So New Zealand's landscape is characterised by extensive clearing of native forests to open up land for grazing and access routes. Firstly by the Māori, which you can see in the change between A and B in this figure, and then by the European settlements through to in C, which is the modern times. Now, where New Zealand differs is in the intensity of burning. The intensity is around 40% of our forested land was burned within the space of 200 years. And in conjunction, the forestry ecosystem is not naturally fire responsive, so there are very long fire return periods of hundreds of years. So very few forest species are adapted to burning. And so therefore, unlike some of the presentations we have heard where fire is used to regenerate forest lands, we are using prescribed fire for other reasons. For the removal of rank grasses, in particular regenerating our native tussock lands, removing scrub, both native and exotic, which are seen as invasive weeds species, and burning unwanted farmland vegetation, the crop residues, large plant debris and hedgerow trimmings. And modern agricultural uses are also dependent on fire to prevent the spread of disease. There is some contention occurring. It has become a contentious issue. It's increasingly being seen, although it's traditional, as an outdated and unnecessary tool. And I've just put up some newspaper clippings from recent times that show some of the negative press in the media that is occurring about burn-offs in the landscape. We have had several deaths, unfortunately, in the rural farming community, and a number of urban-rural interface fires affecting property, which has heightened this issue. And there are concerns about the impact on air pollution and its effect on human health due to smoke and traffic hazard. So with a strong rural burning tradition, why are we now getting this contention? Why are we getting these negative issues coming through in the press? Well, the practice of using fire has been waning and there is less large-scale burning occurring. There's less unimproved land now than in the past, and less need to use fire to open up those grazing areas. And we have improved sprays and spray techniques, particularly in using helicopters. There's a very different set of land users, much smaller land parcels being farmed, and different agriculture sectors. We've got much more dairy and specialist farming occurring, not so much the large sheep runs and stations. And so as a result, there's less knowledge in the rural community about prescribed fire practice, and in particular a dissipation and understanding of the need to use fire in the rural landscape by people in the urban communities due to urbanisation. So because of the changes in land use practices, we need to understand how and where is prescribed burning occurring. We don't have a good handle on the data. So we set out to understand what, where and how prescribed burning is being used by land managers within New Zealand, and also how it's being perceived by the public and why it's being perceived in this manner. So we conducted New Zealand's first comprehensive national survey around the use of fire in productive rural land management. To do this, we undertook a national survey. We targeted three main groups. We targeted land managers, so these are people who are using their land for productive purpose. We conducted we tried to target the rural populace. So these are people that live in the rural communities but are not farming productively in the landscape, but are aware of the fires occurring in their neighbourhoods. And rural fire officers. So these are the policymakers and the local authorities around fire. We had a total of 56 questions relating to the use of fire, with qualitative and quantitative data collected from 696 respondents. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go through all 56 questions in 10 minutes, but I do want to give you a snapshot of some of the key findings that we found from the survey. So, who's using fire? Well, in our responses, we got responses from those who were both using fire, so that's the orange, and those that are not using fire, that's the white. And so we can see that around half of those who responded, 54%, were using fire to manage land on their property. And the reasons are very similar rationale and objectives to other international studies. However, the main types of burning and how they are burning is quite different to what we had thought. When we first undertook this study, we had a perception ourselves that the main use of prescribed fire would be for large open burning of rank grass removal and also for arable cropping. But this study actually showed that the main uses of fire in New Zealand are actually for scrub removal, to remove invasive weeds in the landscape, and also to clean up vegetative debris through pile burning. And so this map of New Zealand shows the most common fuel types burnt that we found from the survey, and you can see that it is not grass, the grey area, but it's actually the white, the rubbish, the vegetative debris, which is the most common type of burning. And very small fires occurring, less than 1 hectare, and many pile burns. But the pile burns are quite large. 43% were more than 10 cubic metres, so quite large piles being burnt. And you can see this here when looking at the most common tool. The predominant use of fire is for rubbish removal, hedgerow clippings and slash. So this is this large sort of rubbish vegetative debris removal. And interestingly, for this conference in particular, is the lack of any fuel reduction objective. So 78% of the respondents said they did not undertake fuel reduction as the main objective. Another question that we asked was, is fire a good option for managing land? And there were some quite mixed responses here, mixed feelings as to whether it was a good option or not for managing land, though you can see more land managers than the rural populace were in support of the use of fire to manage land. So the real question is, why do they feel this way? What's driving their attitudes towards the use of fire? We provided a list of 34 attitudinal statements, and from this we used dimension reduction techniques, and this elicited 5 key factors that were driving these attitudes. So the first one is the benefits, that the use of fire has benefits that outweigh the risks of fire, and in contrast to that the smoke impacts of fire use are predominantly the main concern. The third is the tradition of fire as a tool, that it's been used for so long. The fourth being current regulations and liability that are making it more difficult for a farmer to conduct a burn. And the fifth being this traditional knowledge and the loss of the traditional knowledge around prescribed burning due to changing land use. We then undertook a binomial general linear model to map these factors against the question of, is fire a good option for managing land? And we found that one of the factors, the smoke impacts, had a very significant effect on whether respondents felt it was a good option to use or not. So the more that a respondent agreed that smoke was negative, the less likely they were to believe that fire was a good option. And another aspect that we investigated were the environmental impacts from burning. In this case, we asked land managers and rural fire officers for their opinions around how the use of fire impacts on environmental issues. We found that fire was seen as being particularly positive for the removal of woody weeds, those invasive sort of scrub species, in disease control for soil productivity, for regenerating new growth, and also being a very cost-effective tool. However, we found that fire was not seen very positively for air quality, which we expected, but surprisingly there was quite a neutral view around water quality and the impacts from runoff after burning. We provided the rural fire officers and the land managers with a list of actions that they could take to, when they're conducting a burn, and asked them whether these reduce the risk of escape or increase the risk of escape, because most 20% of the escape fires, 20% of the wildfires are caused by escaped controlled burns. So we wanted to know what are actions that will reduce and what will increase. So there was definite agreement around certain aspects. However, we found that there was a lot of disagreement in some actions that they disagree on, particularly things, for example, spraying before burning, using a helicopter to light a fire, or the time of day that the burn-off occurs. And these could be the reason for some of these escapes occurring. So just in summary, the negative impacts of smoke need to be addressed. This is a critical factor in the support of fire use. There are varied perspectives on whether fire is a good option to use or not, but the majority of landowners are supportive of the use of fire. And there are inconsistent views between land managers and rural fire personnel around actions that reduce or increase the risk of escape. So these could be contributing to this risk of escape. But who's right about these perceptions and who's wrong? Where is the evidence? Do we actually know what is the best practice? So we are now working on a new program of work to marry these perceptions with the reality of what is known, and trying to provide an evidence base that gives some rigour to the diverse range of viewpoints for and against fire use. So I just want to thank our stakeholders and our funders for their support of this research, and thank you for listening.